So this is an example text from the 1700s. And I think it's a really good example actually for all sorts of different things, not least contextually. So if you actually look at the bit of information that's given at the top, a statement by the cloth and merchants, of Leeds defending the use of machines. That's a really great one that shows, the 1700s contextual factors right away. This is all about manufacture. It's all about the growth of machines. It fits very well into the Industrial Revolution. So contextually, that's where you want to go with it. This idea that they've got to defend the use of machines because they're new and they're seen as perhaps a little bit threatening, but they also lead to increased profit. So it fits very, very well into a classic sort of 1700s text. You also see that sense of logic and of reasoning, and if you look at this, you'll see lots of very long, lots of multi-clausal sentences. That is a point to make, which is fair, but better points will actually unpick that and look at, well, what clauses, what's the effect, what's going on here. So I've tried to do that here. In terms of orthography, so in terms of spelling, and in terms of the forms of letters, there's not a fat lot that you could say. If you notice, the spellings are standardised. There's not variation in the way that things are spelled, and the spelling of words is the same as it would be today. So the first point that you could make there is actually this is in line with Einar Haugen's model, that this shows the language is actually at that sort of implementation and acceptance stage, that the language now appears to be standardised, spellings appear to be standardised, and it appears to be accepted. This wouldn't be a mass audience text because, of course, education wasn't compulsory and wasn't widely accessible to many people, but it would be wider than text previously. If you think about it, cloth merchants of Leeds are this kind of new middle class. They are not your the old upper class who'd have had this sort of formal education. So the fact that this has been produced for a larger audience than we might expect suggests that as Haugen's model suggests, that the language has been implemented and has been accepted. The only other thing I would maybe say about orthography, and I've underlined them in black, is those capitalisations. Okay, that is quite different to today. And if you look, what you don't want to say is that there are random capitalisations, because they're not random, but they are different to what we'd use today. If you look, the capitalised words are nouns, and they tend to be nouns that are seen as important in the sentence, and that is the one thing that isn't fully standardised yet. That's the one thing that's not like today. If you look at the nouns that have been capitalised, they are the ones that are seen to be important. They're not necessarily proper nouns, they're not necessarily words at the start of sentences, but they are the ones I see as particularly important. So we get manufacture, we get kingdom, we get work, we get market, prices, okay, aid, machinery, and so on. What you could say here is the words that seem to be important, those nouns, are tending to be about prices, about competition, about the market. So again, with that impact of the Industrial Revolution and the increased profit and that rising middle class. And then I've kind of gone through and underlined, I think, lexical points that you could make in green and grammatical points you could make in red. So in terms of lexis, we get exerting, okay, so you could talk about that in terms of the Latin influence. Remember, if it starts ex, starts x, that's a good sign that it comes from Latin. It's also a progressive aspect verb there, so he's talking about the work that is kind of constantly ongoing when people are working very hard, but the machinery, of course, can reduce that exertion. He talks about a foreign demand, okay, so you've got the impact there of trade, and you see therefore through that collocation of those two words, foreign and demand, those two words put together, we see that impact of global trade in the Industrial Revolution, the new technology which is furthering trade around. He talks about basically the city depends on this foreign demand, so you're seeing how the world is far more connected even by the end of the 1700s. He talks about he's anxious to prevent misrepresentation. So you get that prefixation, the mis at the start of words, that increases during the 1700s, increased prefixation and suffixation. And of course we get it both on that word, mis, representation. So we get prefixation and suffixation, quite a common feature in the 1700s. In the age of reason, in the search of logic, we get words being prefixed and suffixed to essentially make them longer and show that more logical argument. We get the advantages derived to every flourishing manufacture. So you could talk about that firstly as a participle. So remember, a participle is a word that's usually a verb. So flourishing is normally a verb. I was flourishing. But in this case, it's flourishing manufacture. It works as an adjective. So it's a participle. But you could also talk about the impact of French. If you see more than one vowel put together, often that's a sign of a word from French, a flourishing, that OUR construction. Okay, so we're getting this French and Latin influence into the lexis, which adds this formality, which adds to the sense of the text arguing with reason and using intelligence to using perceived intelligence to make their points. We get the word import at the bottom, so we're about halfway down. Okay, so again, seeing the impact of global trade with these words, and then at the end, the universal clothing of mankind. So there's two things I would say there. Firstly, that it almost is part of this moral crusade, this idea that society has to progress, and these machines are helping us progress, and the sense in the Enlightenment that was what humans were all about, making things better for everyone, and that science and reason were the answer. Also, you get the assumption, of course, of mankind. So that word that probably wouldn't be seen as politically correct now, but is just assumed. So you're seeing that impact of patriarchy, the fact that probably most of the respondents to this, most of the listeners, most of the readers are going to be male. And then in that last paragraph, you also get the scribbling mill, the spinning frame, and the fly shuttle. You could talk about those grammatically and also lexically, okay? But I think the main thing you could say lexically, I mean, I don't know what any of those things are. I'm not an expert on those things. But presumably they are new words that are coined for these new devices. So we're getting the coinage of these new terms. These new inventions are created, and therefore we have the words for them. They're capitalised. They are these new things that exist. You could talk there about functional theory. David Crystal talks about essentially language only changes when we need it to, and that shows it there. There's these new things that exist. We need a new word for them, and they've therefore been coined into our language. Of course, they're archaic now. I don't know what those things are. You probably don't know what those things are, and that shows, similarly that over time these have then become obsolete as manufacture and as industry and as technology has advanced further. We don't need those things anymore. In terms of grammar, I've tried to unpick. We know there's lots of long multi-clausal sentences. I've tried to unpick what else you could say about them. So that first one, at a time when the people, so that's an adverbial clause. It tells you when something is happening. So it tells you when that engagement is happening, when that exertion is happening. Okay, so if it starts with at or before or since or while, it's probably a signal that it's an adverbial clause. So straight away you could talk about that. The fact that he grounds this kind of in the present day and grounds it with the people and this social goods. That adverbial clause does that. We get a relative clause later. Who or which is a good sign of a relative clause. The prices which can alone be affected by the aid of machinery. So he qualifies those prices, and then the relative clauses work like adjectives that describe nouns. Those nouns are described as they can alone be affected by the aid of machinery. It shows the urgency basically of how machinery improves kind of the prices and improves the economy. So we're getting that foregrounding of the economic good. Same again, the cloth merchants of Leeds, who depend chiefly on a foreign demand. That relative clause there shows Leeds relying on this foreign demand. We're seeing the impact of global trade and European trade on a relatively small community in Leeds, and that relative clause shows those interconnected societies. Okay, so these adverbial and relative clauses are, yes, they're making it longer and more multi-clausal and more like Latin and showing the age of reason, and they're quite hard to read, but there's also more specific points you could make. It's foregrounding the impact on people, it's foregrounding the need for international trade on England itself. We get the modal verb here. So labour is only half the price it bears here. Should have occasion to defend a conduct. I'd call that a deontic modal because I think it's about obligation. Okay, that fact that essentially we or the manufacturers need to defend these things. So again, the fact that this machinery is perceived here as being a real benefit, and that's that classic industrial revolution mindset. Technology leads to a human good. He carries on, the machines, they wish to remind the inhabitants of this town. Okay, so to remind is an infinitive, relatively easy to spot. It's to followed by a verb. Okay, so we wish to remind. I'd argue that infinitive works really like an adverb. It describes the wish. So the wish, they wish, so wish is the verb, to remind describes that verb. What do they wish to do? They wish to remind us. So that adverb there, the infinitive use as an adverb, which again, I guess foregrounds this idea of reason. The text exists because the manufacturers believe that by reasoning with people, they can change that behaviour, and it's an argument that they've got to win. The inhabitants of this town, so that prepositional phrase, so prepositional phrases, group of words that start with of or on or under or at, the inhabitants of this town. It's showing this text, the interconnectedness with how Leeds depends on the machines and therefore depends on the rest of the world. And at the end, advanced to present its importance and is still increasing. So notice at the end the present tense, that is, and the progressive aspect, increasing. This fact that the good that the machines do happens right now and it exists in the present day, but it goes on creating good all of the time. So the whole point of this text is stressing the impact and the benefit that machines have, that they're still having, and that they will continue to have, and that's what is being stressed here. So it's great for the impact of the Industrial Revolution. So all these things you could link to the context of the time. He talks about has met with such amazing success, may not greater advantages be reasonably expected from cultivating. So he begins that question there. It's an interrogative that he asks. So again, that sense of reason, that he's trying to move the audience to a point where they reason that he is right. And that again is that classic sign of the age of reason, the idea that through long sentences that take you through someone's thinking, that you might then agree with them. So we've got the interrogative. We've also got the may not greater advantages. Okay, the wording of it as a question, that modal again, the may not they be reasonably expected. I'd see that one perhaps more as epistemic, because it's more about the possibility. But again, by wording it as a question, it's showing the sense that he's implying the choices with the reader, but positioning the reader to kind of agree with him. The produce of our own island, an article in demand in all countries. Notice those two prepositional phrases. The products come of England or of Britain, but they are a demand in all countries. So those two prepositional phrases again show interconnectedness. What happens in Britain is demanded in other countries. The prices paid in other countries are creating benefit for Britain. So this is all about interconnectedness, all about trade, all about the benefits of technology and to society. The scribbling mill and spinning frame, I thought the other thing you could say grammatically about them, obviously they're new words that have been coined, but you could also talk about the participles then, scribbling mill, spinning frame. So again, scribbling, spinning are normally verbs. I was scribbling it down, or he was spinning in circles, but in this case they work as adjectives. The mill is a scribbling mill, the frame is a spinning frame. So they work to describe those nouns. So not only are they new coined words, but they also include participles, scribbling mill, spinning frame. I guess because these products, and like I said, I don't know exactly what these machines are, but I'm guessing these machines are ones that produce things, that do things. I'm guessing the spinning frame at some point spins. I'm guessing the scribbling mill at some point, I don't know, kind of either draws lines or moves by scribbling or knitting or knotting things together. So again, it's showing the not only are these new coined words, but they're also showing what these machines are doing. They're all about increasing, reducing effort, but increasing the results. And then this last one, 1/3, and each of them at its first introduction. So again, that prepositional phrase that emphasises that as soon as these were introduced, the benefits continued. And the very last one, every person engaged in the business would exert himself to defend them. So what we get here again is the would, the modal, exert, again like at the start, this Latinate vocabulary, this reflexive pronoun himself, the assumption of maleness as well, but ending as well on to defend, the infinitive. Ultimately, this argument, and this is a classic feature of the Age of Reason, takes us to a point where he's saying at the end, you will be obligated, you will do this, you are willing to put that effort in. And because I've reasoned with the Latinate vocabulary, with the various subordinate clauses, with the prepositional phrases, etc., I've moved you to a point where you will be willing yourselves to defend them. So he ends on that infinitive, implying almost that the reader or the person listening will also be willing to do those things. So I think it's a really classic 1700s text for all those reasons, and they're the sorts of things that you want to unpick. Remember, we'll look at orthography, so spelling, capitalisation, etc. We'll look at lexis, so the words themselves, which I've underlined here in green. We'll look at grammar, features that I've underlined in red. And if you've got a mix of all of them, probably not so much on orthography, but if you've got a mix of those three, then that's kind of what you want if you can link them to context.